On the morning my stepfather's attorney called, I was in the break room at work eating a granola bar over the sink because, once again, I had forgotten to pack lunch. My phone buzzed with an unknown number. I almost ignored it. Then I answered. "Miss Wren?" a measured voice said. "This is Jonathan Keller with Keller and Briggs. I'm calling about Mr. Elliot Hart's estate." The words didn't land all at once. They arrived in parts, like heavy furniture being carried through a narrow doorway. "He passed 11 days ago," Keller continued. "I'm sorry for your loss. I need to inform you that you are the primary beneficiary of his will. He left you the house on Ashwood Ridge Road and the majority of his savings." I stared at the foil wrapper in my hand and thought about the kitchen window in Elliot's house. The latch never closed right. Elliot kept a yellow notepad on the refrigerator for things he meant to fix. The latch was always on the list. Keller gave me timelines, probate, filings, signatures, and asked if I understood. I said yes because that was easier than explaining the truth. That my mind had gone blank except for one stubborn image of a window that didn't quite lock. When I hung up, I went back to my desk and worked through the afternoon like a person imitating normal. I cried later in my car, then drove home and folded myself into the quiet. Before I tell you what happened after that call, before I tell you how grief turned into something sharper, I need to tell you about the summer I was 12. That is where the story actually begins. My mother remarried when I was 9. Her name was Claire Wren. My biological father drifted in and out of my life like a weather pattern, a birthday card, a holiday call, a promise to try harder that dissolved by next month. When my mother introduced me to Elliot Hart, I expected someone loud and theatrical. Instead, Elliot was quiet, a little awkward at dinner parties. The kind of man who kept his library card in his wallet and used it. He worked as a civil engineer for the county and drove a beige sedan that he washed himself every other Saturday, not for show, but because he believed that if you cared for a thing, it lasted. Elliot didn't arrive with grand gestures. He did smaller things. He learned which cereal I liked. He turned down the TV when I did homework. When I had a nightmare once and wandered into the living room at 2 in the morning, he simply scooted over on the couch and handed me the other end of the blanket without asking for a story. At 9, I thought love was dramatic. Elliot's love was practical. My mother, on the other hand, moved through life like she was always slightly behind schedule. She loved me, I think, in whatever way she was capable of. But loving a child and raising one well are different muscles, and she had only ever trained one. She was easily charmed by new things and quickly bored by old ones. Elliot had been a new thing once. By the time I was 12, my mother had found another new thing. His name isn't important. What mattered was the pattern. She started coming home late, then later, then sometimes not at all. She took phone calls in the hallway, laughing softly, turning her body away from the kitchen as if the walls might see through her. Elliot never said a word against her to me. Not once. He didn't poison my mind with bitterness. He didn't ask me to pick a side. He just kept showing up. He kept making dinner. He kept signing my permission slips. He drove me to school when it rained. He learned my teachers' names. He bought detergent that didn't irritate my skin. He did the unglamorous work of parenting like it was a job he had quietly decided to do well. Then my mother left. She left on a Tuesday in October with 2 suitcases and a face that looked like it was already pointed somewhere else. She said, "I'll call," and the door clicked shut behind her. Elliot waited until the sound of her car faded. Then he sat me down at the kitchen table and told me the truth in the most careful way I have ever heard anyone tell the truth. He said that adults sometimes made choices that hurt the people they loved. He said her leaving was not about me. He said I didn't cause it and I couldn't fix it. And then he said the sentence that changed the shape of my life. "I'm going to stay," he said. He didn't say it like a comfort. He said it like a fact, and he did. We were not a dramatic family after that. There were no speeches and no reinventions. There was routine. Dinner most nights, nature documentaries on Sundays, homework at the same spot at the table, a calendar on the fridge with appointments written in neat block letters. The house became calmer, not because everything was easy, but because there was at least one adult who stayed steady. When I was 14, Elliot adopted me legally. I remember the small wood-paneled courtroom and the smell of old paper. The judge asked me if this was what I wanted. I said yes. Elliot's hand trembled slightly when he signed the papers, not from doubt, but from the weight of meaning. Afterward, we ate pancakes at a diner at noon because neither of us knew how to celebrate properly. Elliot didn't say, "I'm proud of you." He said, "You did good," and that was his version of fireworks. I grew up. I left for college 3 hours away, then settled in the city. Elliot and I talked on Sunday mornings. He texted in full sentences with proper punctuation, as if grammar was a way of taking life seriously. He visited once a year, always in April, and brought the same brand of coffee because he noticed things once and then never forgot them. When he was diagnosed with a heart condition, he told me the way he told me about road construction, information, and a plan. He had a good cardiologist. He was changing his diet. He was walking in the mornings. He said he felt fine. For 3 years, he was fine. Then, on a Thursday in February, he wasn't. He died at home, which was how he wanted it. A neighbor found him. I drove those 3 hours in just under 2.5 and stayed in the house on Ashwood Ridge Road for a week, handling what needed to be handled. I didn't fall apart until I found the yellow notepad on the refrigerator. It listed things to fix: the broken latch, a leaky faucet, a loose deckboard. At the very bottom, written smaller than the rest, was my name with a question mark next to it. Claire? Just my name and a question mark. I have never been sure what he meant by that. Some days I think it was a reminder to call me. Some days I think it was worry. Most days I think it was love, the kind that doesn't announce itself, so it leaves a quiet mark in a practical place. 11 days after he died, Keller called to tell me I had inherited the house and the majority of Elliot's savings, about $1.9 million, including the property. I did not know he had that kind of money. Elliot lived quietly and spent carefully. I had simply never wondered what a lifetime of careful choices added up to. The will was filed with the probate court in March. It was clean, witnessed, notarized, no ambiguities. Keller said the process would take months, but was unlikely to be complicated. He used the word unlikely. In April, 6 weeks after the funeral, a certified letter arrived. My mother was contesting the will. I read the letter twice, standing by my mailbox, then went upstairs, made tea I didn't drink, and sat at my kitchen table staring at the paper until the words lost their edges. She was claiming undue influence. In the language of the filing, I had manipulated Elliot, exploited a position of trust, and unduly benefited myself. The story they were selling was not just that I had inherited money, but that I had stolen it by performing affection. My mother's lawyer was named Russell Dyer. From the tone alone, I could tell he was the kind of attorney who built entire arguments out of insinuation. I called Keller immediately. He was calm. He said this happened sometimes with estates of this size. He said the will was well documented. He said we had a strong case. "Let me handle it," he told me. So I did. For 2 months, I watched paperwork move back and forth. I answered questions. I gathered documents, birthday cards, phone logs, photos, emails, evidence of a relationship that felt ridiculous to prove because it had never been performative to me. In Elliot's closet, I found a box of 23 years of things he had saved: school pictures, drawings I'd made as a child, notes I'd forgotten I ever wrote. He had kept them in a folder labeled with my name in tidy handwriting. In June, we went to mediation. It went nowhere. My mother sat across a conference table from me for the first time in 8 years. She looked older. She did not look sorry. Dyer made arguments that felt designed more to rattle me than to win legally. He suggested Elliot had become dependent on my calls and visits. He suggested my relationship with him had been strategically cultivated. He used that word strategically like it was a blade. I said very little. Keller had advised me to say very little. What I wanted to say was simple. You cannot strategically cultivate a relationship for 23 years with someone who reads library books for fun and keeps receipts for his receipts. Elliot had never been careless. He measured his life the way he measured bridges, with patience and proof. But I kept quiet, because court isn't about catharsis. After mediation, I wasn't afraid of losing. I was afraid of how ugly it was going to get before it ended. I was afraid of what my mother was willing to say about Elliot about me, just to get a slice of money she had walked away from years ago. The hearing was scheduled for late September. A week before it, Keller called me with a change in his tone, still controlled, but edged with relief. "Claire," he said, "I found something in Elliot's files. Documents your mother's attorney doesn't seem to know exist." Elliot had written what he called letters of record for years. Not emotional letters to anyone in particular, just careful, dated notes he kept in a folder labeled plainly by year. They were not dramatic. They were Elliot, specific, orderly, unembellished. They noted Sunday calls, April visits, small kindnesses, and the ordinary ways we kept each other in our lives. They described our relationship as, in his words, the one I am most proud of in my adult life. Keller said, "These letters will make things much simpler." That night, I pictured Elliot at his desk on a quiet evening, writing those notes because it felt right to tell the truth clearly and keep a record of it. I realized he had protected me without ever announcing that he was doing it. The day of the hearing, I wore the most boring outfit I owned, like neutrality could keep me safe. My mother arrived with Dyer and a new haircut that looked expensive. She didn't meet my eyes. She sat as if she were waiting for a table at a restaurant. Inside the courtroom, Dyer performed concern. He spoke about isolation and dependency and manipulation. He painted Elliot as vulnerable and me as calculating. He implied Elliot's love had been something I manufactured. Then Keller stood and put reality on the table. He presented the will. He presented the notarization. He presented a short note Elliot had left with the will explaining, in plain language, why he had written it the way he had. He did not insult my mother. He did not rant. He simply stated that he had raised me, that I had remained in his life, and that he wanted his home and savings to help me build a stable future. Then Keller presented the box of evidence from the closet. Then he presented Elliot's letters of record. You could feel the difference in the room. Accusations can float. Records land. The judge asked Dyer a series of questions he did not answer well. At one point, she looked up from the letters and said, in a tone that wasn't unkind but left very little room for argument, "Counselor, I'm having difficulty identifying the legal basis for the undue influence claim given the documentary record before me." The hearing lasted less than 3 hours. The will stood. I walked out of that courthouse into the September afternoon and stood on the steps for a minute before I went anywhere. The trees on the street had just started to turn. A woman walked by with a dog. People held coffee cups. Ordinary life moved on as if my private storm had been a minor change in the weather. In the parking lot, I called Keller to thank him. He said it had always been a clean case. Elliot made it easy, he said, by being Elliot. That evening, I drove to Ashwood Ridge Road. I hadn't been back since February, when I packed up grief into boxes and tried not to collapse under it. I let myself in and turned on the kitchen light. The notepad was still on the refrigerator. The broken latch was still broken. My name was still at the bottom with the question mark. Claire? I fixed the latch. It took 4 minutes. Elliot's tools were exactly where they should be, organized in the garage with the same quiet competence he had used to organize the rest of his life. I tightened the screw, tested the window, listened to it click closed, and felt something in my chest loosen. Then I sat at the kitchen table and let the silence be what it was. I still have the house. I rent it now to a young family. They have 2 kids and a dog. They send me a Christmas card each year, and the children draw on the envelope. It makes the place feel lived in again, which feels like the most respectful thing I can offer. The savings I used carefully sensible things, long-term things. I paid down debts. I built stability. I set aside a portion to create a small scholarship at the community college in Elliot's County for students studying engineering or technical fields. It isn't large, but it exists, and a few students have used it. One recipient emailed me to say the scholarship made her feel like someone was paying attention. Elliot paid attention. That was the thing about him. That was the whole thing. People ask whether the lawsuit made me hate my mother. Hate is too loud for what I feel now. What I feel is clearer than hate. My mother made choices. The choices had weight. Not because the universe keeps a ledger, but because choices shape a person over time. She became someone who left, and then years later became someone who returned only when there was money on the table. That isn't a punishment. It's just the math of who she chose to be, compounding slowly across decades. Elliot became someone who stayed. He practiced it in small moments when nobody was watching, turning down the TV, buying the right cereal, handing a blanket to a scared kid at 2 a.m. He practiced character like you practice any skill quietly, repeatedly until it became the most natural thing about him. After everything settled, I noticed I had inherited more than a house and a bank account. I had inherited his tempo. Elliot moved through the world slowly on purpose. He listened all the way to the end of a sentence. He fixed the squeak before it became a break. He returned calls when he said he would, even if the call was awkward. For a while after the hearing, Sundays felt empty. I would reach for my phone at 9 and remember there would be no calm voice asking, "Did you eat? Did you sleep?" I started calling other people instead. Friends I'd been meaning to check on, an aunt I rarely spoke to, the neighbor who found him. At first it felt like acting, then it began to feel like continuity. Sometimes I drive out to Ashwood Ridge Road alone and sit in the driveway before I go inside. I look at the porch steps he meant to sand, the gutter he planned to clean, the trees he trimmed every spring. None of it is dramatic. That is the point. Love, Elliot taught me, isn't a scene. It's small decisions you make again and again until they become who you are. And the record of it is real. There's a notepad on my refrigerator now. I keep it for things I mean to fix. Most days it's boring. A light bulb, a loose handle, a call I keep putting off. Sometimes I write a name on it and add a question mark. Not doubt, attention. Because the small things aren't small. Showing up matters. Staying is an act you repeat, and it adds up to something no court can take from you.